The station smelled like burnt metal and recycled air. It always did. Iron Hold was not a pretty place. It was a working place, a frontier colony station bolted together over 30 years by people who had no time for pretty. It sat at the edge of a dying star system, far from the clean cities of the inner colonies, far from the people who made decisions in comfortable rooms. Out here the stars were cold and the silence between them was heavy. Nora Vance stood at the window of Director Bray's office and looked at those stars. She was 34 years old. She had short dark hair, tired eyes, and a way of standing that made people think twice before wasting her time. She had been a colonial ambassador for 6 years. She had talked her way through trade disputes, border arguments, and one very uncomfortable situation involving a Carath inspection team and a crate of unlicensed grain alcohol. She was good at her job, but what Bray had just told her was not a job. It was something else entirely. Say it again, she said without turning from the window. Director Ethan Bray was a heavy man with gray at his temples and the look of someone who had not slept well in several days. He sat behind his desk with a data pad in his hand and a cup of cold coffee. He had forgotten about the KTH have issued an edict of dissolution. He said it covers all 14 of our frontier colonies in this sector. At every settlement, every person. They want us gone. On what grounds? They say the worlds we settled were ceded by the Wraith, an extinct precursor race. The KTH claim legal custodianship over all Wraith touched territory under their law. We are trespassers under their law. They have every right to remove us. He paused. Remove is their word, not mine. Nora finally turned from the window. How long do we have? The edict gets ratified in 72 hours. After that, it becomes binding under galactic compact law. Every major power in this region will be required to recognize it. We won't be able to challenge it without starting a war we cannot win. She crossed her arms. And the escape clause you mentioned. Bray set the data pad on the desk and turned it toward her. It is called the bonded claim. It is an old provision buried in Carath law, written over 4,000 years ago. In the original text says that if a living being with verifiable breath lineage publicly bonds with a representative of the claiming species, and that bond is recorded in the Cath legal archive, then all territory connected to that lineage becomes legally protected under the bonded party's name permanently. Nora stared at him. The breath are extinct. We thought they were. He tapped the data pad. 3 weeks ago, during a routine docking scan, our medical team flagged an anomaly in a passenger's genetic profile, buried deep, faint, but it was there. Breath genetic markers unmistakable according to every xenobiologist. We quietly ran it past. Who is the passenger? Bray picked up a second file and opened it. There was not much in it. A blurry image, a short list of facts that had more gaps than information. His name is Cole Mercer. He has been drifting through frontier stations for at least 7 years. No registered home world, no ship of his own, no employment record beyond occasional day labor. He pays in cash, keeps to himself, and leaves before anyone gets to know him. Bray looked up. He is currently in the lower deck bar on level 9, losing at cards. Nora looked at the blurry image for a long moment. The man in it was lean, with a quiet kind of face, not remarkable, not striking. he looked like someone who was very good at not being noticed. Yeah, and you want me to convince him to perform a Karth bonding ceremony on behalf of the entire human species in 72 hours, yes. With a man I have never met also, yes. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, what does the bonding ceremony actually require? Bray had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. It is the legal equivalent of a marriage. Under Karth law, it is binding and cannot be dissolved during an active review period. Nora took a slow breath, so she looked at the stars again. 14 colonies. Hundreds of thousands of people, farmers, and engineers and teachers and children, who had been born out here and had never known anything else, people who had built something from nothing because that was what humans did, she thought. About all of them, then she picked up her jacket from the back of the chair and put it on. Which bar? She said. Level 9 was loud and dim and smelled like spilled drinks. There were about 40 people in the bar, and most of them dock workers and freighter crews, and none of them looked like they were having a particularly good evening. Nora found Cole Mercer at a corner table with 3 other people staring at a hand of cards that was clearly not doing him any favors. He had a nearly empty glass in front of him and the look of a man who was losing on purpose just to have something to do. She sat down across from him. He looked up. His eyes were gray, ordinary gray, but there was something behind them that was harder to name, a kind of watchfulness, the kind that did not come from training but from years of not knowing when something was going to go wrong. I don't know you, he said. No, she said. My name is Nora Vance. I'm a colonial ambassador and I need about 10 minutes of your time. The other players drifted away from the table with the instincts of people who recognized a serious conversation arriving. Nicole looked at her steadily and said nothing. She told him the basics, the edict, the bonded claim, the genetic scan. She did not dress it up or make it sound smaller than it was. She told him plainly that she was asking him to enter a legal bond with her in order to save 14 colonies from being erased. She told him the timeline. She told him she understood it was an enormous thing to ask a stranger. He listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished and he was quiet for a moment, then he said, no. He said it without anger, without cruelty, just a flat, quiet word, the way a door closes. She nodded slowly. She had expected it. She stood up, straightened her jacket, and looked down at him. People who don't choose to belong anywhere, she said, usually stop belonging somewhere first. I'm sorry about wherever that was. She left her contact ID on the table and walked out. She was back in her quarters, still dressed, staring at the ceiling at 3:00 in the morning when the knock came at her door. She opened it. Cole Mercer stood in the corridor, hands in his pockets, looking like a man who had argued with himself for several hours and lost. I'll think about it, he said. She stepped back and let him in. Outside, the stars burned cold and quiet, and somewhere in the deep dark of space, Karth fleet was already moving down in the diplomatic wing. An ambassador, Valshara of the KTH Dominion, stood before her communication array and allowed herself a thin smile. She had just received word that Director Bray had invoked the bonded claim provision. Her aide had asked whether they should be concerned. No, she said, let them try. Let the humans grasp at 4,000-year-old laws like children. Grabbing at smoke, she turned off the display. They have no idea what they are. About to wake up, Cole did not sleep. That night, Thai sat in the chair by Nora's small window and looked at the stars while she made 2 cups of coffee. And asked him nothing, she just handed him one and sat down across from him. And they stayed like that for a while. Quiet, the station humming around them. Eventually he spoke, not about the ceremony, not about the colonies. He talked about the gaps. He said that when he was 19 years old, he woke up on a salvage freighter 3 systems from anywhere he could name. He had no identification. He no bag, no memory of how he got there, or where he had come from before. The crew of the freighter were not unkind. They let him work for passage and put him off at the next station. He had been moving ever since, 7 years of drifting from port to port, doing what work he could find, never staying long enough to become someone anyone would remember. Do you know what the gaps feel like? Nora asked. Cole looked at his coffee. Like a wall, he said. I reach back and there's just nothing there, and sometimes late at night I hear something on the other side of it, like a sound I can almost make out. He paused. I stopped trying to figure it out a long time ago. Nora watched him. She had spoken to hundreds of people in difficult situations. She knew the difference between someone performing honesty and someone actually giving it. Cole was giving it. Whatever he was not a liar. I'll do it, he said before she could speak again. That not for the politics, not for the law. He looked at her directly. You said something earlier about people who stop belonging. I've been that for a long time. If I'm going to stop running, I'd rather stop for something that matters. She nodded. She did not make it a bigger moment than it was. She simply said thank you and meant it. The ceremony was held 2 days later in Iron Hold's formal diplomatic hall, a room that was used perhaps 4 times a year and still smelled faintly of the cleaning solution applied in a hurry. Director Bray had managed to hang the correct banners. Karth legal recorder stood at the front of the room with a scanning array and an expression of careful neutrality. Velshara sat to one side with 2 aides and watched with the calm, a measuring look of someone who expects to be entertained by failure. There were no flowers, there was no music. Cole wore a clean jacket that Nora suspected he had borrowed from someone because the sleeves were slightly too long. Nora wore her ambassador's formal coat, dark gray, plain buttons, the kind of thing designed to be taken seriously. They stood in front of the legal recorder and spoke the required phrases in both human standard and Karth formal, which Nora had spent the previous night memorizing. The KTH bonding ritual was older than most of the galactic laws currently in use. It required a spoken declaration, a genetic registration into the KTH legal archive, and a physical contact point, the joining of hands at the moment of registration. It was not romantic in design. It was a legal instrument, but when the scanner activated and Cole's hand was in hers, and the ancient Karth text was read aloud, may something happen that none of them had planned for. The genetic detection array spiked. Every instrument in the room lurched at once. The numbers on the scanner did not just confirm the breath markers, they lit up like something had been turned on deep inside Cole's biology. The legal recorder took a step back. One of Shara's aides said something sharp and fasting Kareth that nobody translated. Shara herself went very still. The reading stabilized. The bond was registered, and the edict of dissolution was legally suspended pending a 30-day verification window that Velshara formally requested in a voice that gave away nothing. Director Bray accepted the window without argument. The ceremony was over. Cole looked down at his own hand after Nora let go of it. He did not say anything, but his expression had changed in a way that was small and hard to name, like a man who has heard a sound and cannot tell yet if it is something to be afraid of. A Karth law required the bonded parties to remain together and in the same registered location for the full 30 days of the verification window. It was a provision designed to prevent fraudulent claims from being dissolved the moment the paperwork cleared. Director Bray explained this to both of them with the careful tone of someone delivering news they expect to be received badly. Cole took it without complaint. Nora took it the same way, and they were given adjoining quarters on the station's middle, not large, not comfortable, but private. They settled into a routine that was strange at first, and then after a few days simply became normal. They ate breakfast at the same small table. They took different routes through the station during the day. In the evenings they talked, sometimes for hours, about nothing particularly important. The stations they had each been to, the people they had met, had the things they had wanted before life became complicated. Nora learned that Cole was funny in a dry, quiet way that took a moment to catch. She learned that he was patient with people but had no patience at all for pretense. She learned that he was kind in the small ways, the ones that did not announce themselves. Cole learned that Nora did not back down from anything ever, and that she found this trait slightly exhausting in herself, and he learned that she was homesick for a place she had not been back to in 4 years, and that she never talked about it directly but circled it in conversation, the way people do when something is too real to look at straight on. He learned that she was braver than she thought she was. On the 9th day he had his first episode. He was standing in the small kitchen making coffee, and then he was on the floor with no memory of the time between. The mug was broken. His hands were shaking when Nora came through the connecting door and found him. He told her he had slipped. She looked at the unbroken floor and the perfectly dry wall and said nothing, but she sat with him until the shaking stopped. That night she heard him through the wall speaking in a language that did not sound like any human tongue she had ever encountered. Low and rhythmic and very, very old. It stopped after a few minutes. In the morning he was quiet at breakfast, and she did not push, but she watched him the way she had started watching him, carefully, with the part of her that was beginning to understand that something was coming. What she did not know was that across the station in her private quarters, Ambassador Velshara was composing an encrypted message to her superiors. It was short. It said, "The breath vessel has been activated by the bonding ritual. The Wraith is no longer dormant. Recommend immediate escalation before the window closes." And she sent it, and then sat back and looked at the stars outside her window. The same stars, the same cold dark, and for the first time in a very long time, the ambassador of the Kareth Dominion felt something she had not felt in decades. She felt afraid. He happened at 2:00 in the morning. Nora heard the crash through the connecting wall, not a small sound, not a dropped cup. It was a deep, heavy sound, like something structural had given way. She was through the door in seconds. The coal was on the floor in the middle of his room, and the wall beside his bed had a crack running through it from floor to ceiling. Not a stress fracture, not a building fault. Something had hit it from the inside with enormous force, and that something had been Cole's hand. He was conscious, his eyes were open, but for about 4 seconds they were the wrong color, a pale, a cold silver that did not belong to any human being, and then they shifted back to gray, and he blinked and looked at her like a man surfacing from deep water. I couldn't stop it, he said. His voice was rough. I tried to hold it back and I couldn't. Nora did not panic. She went back to her room, got her comm unit, and called Dr. Aaron Fitch. She told him to come quietly and to bring his full neuro scanning kit. She did not tell him why. Over the open channel, E. Fitch had been the station's chief medical officer for 11 years. He had seen enough strain things in the outer colonies to know when a question should wait. He arrived in 15 minutes. He took one look at the cracked wall and a Cole sitting on the edge of the bed with silver still flickering at the edges of his irises, and he set up his equipment without a word. The scan took 40 minutes. When it finished, Fitch sat back in his chair and was quiet for a long time. Yeah, there is a second structure in your brain, he said to Cole. He said it the way doctors say things they do not fully believe yet. It is not a tumor. It is not a lesion. It is organized, deeply organized, in a way that does not match any human neurology I have ever seen. It is nested inside your own brain. Architecture like something that was placed there deliberately, and it has been growing more active over the past 2 weeks. Cole looked at him. What is it? Fitch pulled up the scan results and cross-referenced them against the breath data fragments in the station's xenobiology archive, files that had been collected over decades and mostly sat unread because the breath had been extinct for so long that studying them felt academic. It took him another hour. When he found the match, his face went pale in the quiet way of someone who has just understood something they were not prepared to understand. He called it a Wraith coil. The breath, then he explained slowly, had been destroyed 4,000 years ago, not by age, not by natural decline. They had been destroyed by the Karath Dominion, systematically and completely, because they had built something the Karath feared more than anything else in the known galaxy. A weapon, not a ship weapon or a bomb. Something far worse, a living weapon, designed to unravel the quantum layer that the Karath's faster than light travel infrastructure depended on. The one activation with the entire Karath fleet network across a sector. Multiple activations could tear the Dominion apart from the inside. The breath had not used it. They had hidden it instead and coded it into a genetic lineage buried so deep that it would pass from generation to generation without anyone knowing it was there. They had hidden it inside a human bloodline in the early days when breath survivors had blended quietly into human populations on the outer worlds, and they had set a very specific activation trigger, one that was not a button or a code but a ceremony, an ancient ceremony that had not been performed in 4,000 years. The bonded claim ritual. The silence in the room after Fitch finished speaking was very long. Cole was the first to break it. the ceremony. Activated it, he said. It was not a question. Yes, Fitch said. Cole looked at Nora. She was standing by the door, with her arms crossed in her face, steady, and the way she held herself when she was processing something very large and refusing to let it knock her over. She met his eyes. He could see that she understood that she had not known that. None of them had known that the thing they had done to save everyone had set something in motion that none of them had been prepared for. Velshara knew. Nora said quietly, the verification window, the 30 days. She wasn't confirming the bond, she was stalling. Fitch nodded slowly. If the car destroyed the breath to prevent this weapon from being used, then they would have kept records. They would have known what the bonded claim could trigger the moment those instruments spiked in the ceremony room. They knew the Wraith coil had activated, and they needed time to position a fleet, Nora said, as if in answer. The station's proximity alert sounded at that exact moment, a low or steady tone. That meant something very large had just dropped out of faster than light travel. Nearby, then another, then 3 more in quick succession. Director Bray's voice came over the station comm 30 seconds later, tight and controlled. All senior staff to the operations center. We have a Karth fleet at close range, multiple capital ships. This is not a drill. Cole stood up from the bed. He was steadier than he should have been. His eyes were fully gray again. He said, how many people are on those 14 colonies? Just over 300,000, Nora said. He nodded once. He picked up his jacket from the floor and put it on. He did not look like a man who was afraid. He looked like a man who had spent 7 years running and had just decided, quietly and completely, that he was done with it. The operations center was controlled chaos when they arrived. Director Bray stood at the main display and watching 5 KATH capital ships hold position at the edge of weapons range. 3 colonial defense ships sat between the station and the Karath fleet, small, older, badly outgunned. Their captains had moved into position without being ordered to. Bray had not told them to hold. They had simply gone. Velshara's transmission came in 90 seconds after Nora and Cole arrived. The ambassador appeared on the main screen, looking exactly as she always looked. Calm, precise, faintly superior, he said. That the Cath Dominion had reason to believe the bonded individual known as Cole Mercer was carrying a classified breath artifact of extreme danger inside his neural architecture. She said the Dominion was prepared to accept his peaceful surrender for containment purposes. She said the 14 colonies would be spared fully and permanently in exchange. She gave them 6 hours. Bray closed the channel and turned to the room, and there were 20 people in the operations center, military staff, colonial representatives, engineers, diplomats. He looked at all of them and said simply, we need to decide what we do. The debate that followed was not clean. Some people argued that 300,000 lives were worth more than one. They said it quietly with pain on their faces. Because they were not cruel people, they were scared people doing math. Now, others said that surrendering Cole would make the protection of the colonies meaningless because you could not build something worth saving on the foundation of handing your own people over. It went back and forth for 20 minutes. Then Nora stood up. She did not give a long speech. She said that they had crossed 40 light years to build something out here, and that something was not just land or air or water. It was the decision made over and over again to be the kind of people who did not give each other up when things got hard, she said. If they handed Cole over today, they would win the colonies and lose the only thing that made the colonies worth having. The room was quiet when she finished. A colonial representative from the third moon of Kepler 9, a broad, sunburned farmer named Gil Dawson, who had never spoken in an operations briefing before in his life, raised his hand and said, I didn't come 40 light years to become that kind of people. I'm with her. One by one, hands went up around the room, not all of them, but most, and the ones that did not go up stayed down in silence rather than in opposition, which was its own kind of answer. Bray looked at Cole. Cole nodded. Bray turned back to the display and said, then we have 6 hours to find another way. Let's get to work. Outside, the Carath fleet held position and waited, and deep inside Cole Mercer's mind, and in the dark place behind the wall he had lived next to for 7 years, something ancient and enormous turned over slowly in its sleep, like a creature that had been waiting a very long time and had just heard a sound it recognized. It was almost time. The 6 hours felt like 6 minutes and 6 years at the same time. Dr. Fitch set up a full medical station in the operations center's back room. Every neural monitor the station owned, it wired into a single display above a wide medical chair that looked far too ordinary for what it was about to be used for. Cole sat in it without being asked. He rolled up his sleeve for the sensor cuffs and looked at the ceiling while Fitch worked, and he did not complain and did not make it harder than it already was. Nora stayed close, not in the way that crowded him, just near enough that he could see her when he looked sideways. He did look a few times. It seemed to help. Fitch had spent the past 2 hours going deeper into the breath data archive than anyone had gone before. Most of it was fragmented pieces of a civilization that had been deliberately erased, surviving only scattered xenobiology databases and the occasional artifact recovered from dead worlds. But there was enough to understand what the Wraith coil was designed to do, and crucially enough to understand one thing that changed everything. And the Wraith coil was not an automatic weapon. It was not a bomb on a timer. It had been built to be guided. The breath who carried it was supposed to be a conscious partner, someone who could communicate with the Wraith, direct it, tell it what to do and what not to do. Without that guidance, the Wraith would operate on its last known instructions, which were 4,000 years old and amounted to destroy everything Carath within range. The problem was that Cole was human, and the Wraith had no framework for a human host. It had woken up inside a mind it did not recognize in a time it did not understand, and it was doing the only thing it knew how to do, pushing outward, trying to take control, trying to complete a mission that had been over for 40 centuries. We cannot suppress it, Fitch said, standing in front of his display with the look of a man who had not blinked in an hour. If we try to block it neurologically, it will push harder. It could tear his mind apart trying to break through. The only way this works is if Cole can stay conscious during contact and serve as a bridge, communicate with it directly, explain what it does not understand. And if it doesn't listen, one of the engineers asked from across the room. Fitch was quiet for a moment, then it activates fully and we find out exactly What a VTH super weapon does to a KATH fleet at close range along with everything else in the sector. Nobody spoke after that. Nora pulled a chair up beside Cole and sat down. He turned his head to look at her. His eyes were holding steady gray human his, but she could see the effort it was taking. There was a tightness around his jaw and a stillness in the way he held himself, like a man standing in a strong current and planting his feet. I need you to tell me what it feels like, she said. When it comes, he thought about it, like something very large is standing just behind me, he said, and it keeps leaning forward. It doesn't understand where it is. It doesn't understand me. It just knows it was built to do something and it wants to do it. Does it feel dangerous? Everything that big feels dangerous. He paused, but it doesn't feel cruel. That's the strange thing. It feels like grief, almost like something that has been waiting a very long time and is very, very tired. Nora looked at him for a moment and then she said, then maybe that's the way in. The plan they built in the next 40 minutes was not a military plan. It was not a technical plan. It was at its core a very human plan, which meant it was held together with improvisation and the stubborn refusal to accept that there was no solution. Cole would allow the Wraith to surface, controlled, monitored, with Fitch watching every neural reading and ready to intervene if Cole lost coherence. While the Wraith was present, a Cole would try to stay conscious enough to act as a translator between his own mind and the ancient intelligence inside it. He would try to explain in whatever way the Wraith could understand that the world it had woken into was not the world it had been built for. And Nora would talk to him, not to the Wraith, to Cole, anchoring him, keeping him present, giving him something human to hold on to while he stood between two very different kinds of existence. Outside, the clock ticked down. 4 hours left, then 3. The 3 colonial defense ships held their position between the station and the KTH fleet. They had not moved. Their captains had been informed of the plan. The youngest of them, Lieutenant Claire Moss, 26 years old and in command of a patrol craft that had no business being anywhere near a Karath capital ship, opened a channel to the other two and said in a perfectly steady voice, "We've been outnumbered since the first time a human picked up a rock. This is just a bigger rock problem." The other two captains laughed short, tired laughs and held the line. They held it for 47 minutes before the first KATH warning shot crossed their bow. They held it anyway. Inside the back room, Cole closed his eyes and let go. It was not graceful. Fitch's monitor spiked immediately. 3 of the neural readings went critical in the first 30 seconds, and then Cole's hands gripped the arms of the chair hard enough to bend the metal cuffs. The lights in the room flickered once, then steadied. A low sound came from Cole's throat, not a human sound. Something older and deeper, resonating at a frequency that made the walls hum faintly. Then Nora leaned forward and started talking. She did not talk about the Wraith. She did not talk about the mission or the colonies or the KTH fleet 3,000 km away. She talked about Cole. She told him about the first night they had talked, when he sat in her quarters at 3:00 in the morning with his hands around a coffee cup, and told her about waking up with no memory on a salvage freighter. She told him she had thought about that conversation more than she expected to. She told him that the man who had shown up at her door that night. Not because anyone asked him to, but because he had decided to stop running. Was the most quietly brave thing she had seen in 6 years of working in places where brave things happened. Cole surfaced, just for a moment his eyes opened, gray and present, and he said 2 words in a language Fitch immediately recognized as breath. Then he went under again. Fitch recorded it and ran it through the archive. Translation: the 2 words meant roughly, "Not yet." He came back up 40 seconds later and gave them another fragment, but then another 4 minutes after that. Each time he surfaced, Nora's voice pulled him back to himself before the Wraith could pull him fully under. Each fragment Fitch translated was a piece of a conversation happening in a place none of them could see, between a tired, scarred human man and a weapon older than recorded human history. The 4th fragment came back with a translation that stopped Fitch completely. He read it twice, then he looked up at Nora and said quietly he found it. He found the core memory. What is it? She asked without looking away from Cole. Fitch looked back at the screen. His voice was careful. The last thing the breath civilization recorded before it was destroyed. It is not a battle order. It is not a command. It is, he paused, the closest translation is a prayer or a hope, something written by the people who built the Wraith coil to whoever would one day wake it up. He read it slowly. We do not build this out of hatred. We build this out of love. We hope that whoever wakes it finds a world worth protecting, and we hope they are wise enough to choose peace. The room was very quiet. Cole opened his eyes. They were silver, fully, completely silver. And then slowly, like a tide going out, the silver faded back to gray. He let out a long breath, his hands released the bent cuffs. He looked at Nora and said in plain human English, in a voice that was rough but entirely his own, "It heard you. It heard everything you said." "Is it going to stop?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. The monitors held steady. Outside, the Karth fleet was moving into closer range. The clock showed 40 minutes left on Velshara's deadline. "Not yet," Cole said, "but it's listening." He straightened in the chair. "Let me talk to it a little longer." Nora nodded. She leaned forward again and kept her voice even and warm and constant, a human voice in the dark, steady as a light in open water. And Cole went back under, carrying it with him like something to hold on to. Outside, Claire Moss and her 2 ships held the line and did not move. And the stars watched everything with the same cold silence they always had, indifferent and ancient and unchanged. The last 20 minutes of Velshara's deadline felt like standing at the edge of a very high cliff in a strong wind. Fitch watched his monitors without blinking, and the neural readings on his display had been doing things that no medical textbook had ever described. 2 separate consciousness patterns running inside one human brain, sometimes overlapping, sometimes pulling hard in opposite directions, always on the edge of something catastrophic. Cole had gone under 4 more times since the 4th fragment. Each time he surfaced, he was thinner, not physically but in the way that mattered, at the effort of holding himself together while something ancient and enormous moved through him, was costing him in ways that did not show up on any scanner, but he kept going back. Nora never stopped talking. Her voice had gone slightly somewhere around the 40th minute, but she did not slow down. She talked about small things and large things with equal steadiness, the color of the sky on a colony world she had visited once, but the way the stations, corridors smelled different near the lower decks, the specific silence of deep space outside a viewport at night. She talked about the morning Cole had made her laugh for the first time, unexpectedly over a burned piece of toast. She talked about what she thought the colonies would look like in 50 years if they were allowed to grow. She kept his name in her sentences, often like a rope thrown to man in deep water. Cole, 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 and then with 11 minutes left on the clock something shifted. Fitch saw it. First on the monitors, the two patterns stopped pulling against each other. They did not merge, they did not fight, they simply went still side by side like two people who have been arguing for a very long time and have finally run out of words and are just sitting with the truth between them. Cole opened his eyes. They were silver, fully, completely, deeply silver, not flickering, not fading, just present. And he sat forward in the chair. When he spoke, it was in two voices layered over each other, his own and something older beneath it, the way a chord is made of separate notes. He said in both human standard and ancient breath simultaneously. It understands, it knows the war is over, it knows what it is and what it was built for, and it knows that the people who built it are gone. He paused, and something moved across his face that was not quite human and not quite alien, but was entirely and unmistakably grief. It has been alone for 4,000 years. It did not know, nobody ever told it. Room was absolutely silent. What does it want to do? Nora asked. Cole was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, it wants to be witnessed. It wants someone to know it existed and that the people who made it were real and that they mattered. He looked at Nora directly, and both sets of eyes, his gray beneath the silver, were steady and clear. And then it wants to rest. Nora nodded. She reached out and put her hand over his. She said, we know. We're witnesses. Tell it we know. Something in the room changed in a way that had no physical explanation, feeling sudden and complete, like pressure releasing after a very long time. The Fitch's monitors leveled out into the comps readings they had shown. In 2 days, the silver in Cole's eyes began to fade slowly and completely, until they were gray again, fully gray, fully his. He let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere very deep and leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes. Is it gone? Fitch asked carefully. No, Cole said without opening his eyes. It's sleeping. It'll be there, but it's quiet. Now he was still for a moment. It chose this. It's not a bomb anymore. It's just part of me. Director Bray, who had been standing in the doorway for the last 10 minutes, without anyone noticing, turned and walked back to the main operations center with the expression of a man who has seen something he will spend the rest of his life trying to find words for. He sat down at the communications console. He opened a channel to the Cath fleet. Velshara appeared on screen with 5 minutes left on her own deadline. She looked for the first time since any of them had met her, uncertain. Cole walked into frame behind Bray. He looked tired, genuinely deeply tired. The kind of tired that lives in the bones, but he was upright and present, and entirely himself. He looked at Velshara on the screen, and he began to speak, not in human standard, in breath. Old, formal, precise breath, the kind that had not been spoken aloud by Living voice in 40 centuries. Translation system struggled and then caught up and the words came through in flat, careful Karth formal. He told her what the Wraith coil was. He told her what it could do. He told her that it had been awake and active for the past several hours, fully capable of doing exactly what it had been designed to do. He told her that it had chosen of its own will to stand down, not because humanity was weak, not because they were afraid, but because they had made a different choice than destruction when destruction was available to them. He told her that the weapon was still inside him, still bonded, still present, and that it would remain so for the rest of his life. He said this without threat. In his voice, he said it simply as a fact, the way you state the weather. Then he said something that was not in any negotiating manual ever written. He said the breath were real, they lived, and they built and they loved things, and they were destroyed by your people before they could do anything about it. I am carrying the last piece of what they were, and I am telling you on their behalf that they did not build this out of hatred. They built it because they wanted to survive. You should remember that the channel was silent for a very long time. Then Velshara said in a voice that had lost its precise superiority and had become something older and quieter, the fleet will withdraw. The verification window is closed. The bonded claim stands. She paused. Colonies are protected. She closed the channel on the external display. The 5 Karath capital ships turned and began to move away slowly at first, then faster until they folded back into faster than light travel and were gone. The 3 colonial defense ships held their position for a moment longer, as if making sure, and then Lieutenant Claire Moss' voice came over the comm, saying, confirmed, they're gone. He all clear. Director Bray sat back in his chair and put both hands over his face for a moment. Then he took them away and said very quietly, well, all right. Then the celebrations that came after were real and warm and a little chaotic, the way human celebrations always are. People from across the station crowded into corridors and common areas. The news reached the 14 colonies within the hour, and the responses that came back were the kind of messages that are hard to read without your eyes going blurry. Gil Dawson, the farmer from Kepler 9's third moon, sent a single line, told you so. Cole stood at the observation deck. For a long time that evening, the deck was empty except for him and Nora, who had found him there an hour after everything ended, and she stood beside him at the wide viewport, and they both looked at the stars, the same cold, quiet stars, and neither of them said anything for a while. How does it feel? She asked eventually, having it in there, knowing it's there. Cole thought about it, quieter than before. He said, when I didn't know what it was, it felt like something chasing me. Now it just feels like company. Strange company, but it's not trying to take over, it's just there. He paused. It remembers things. Sometimes they surface breath things, a sunset on a world that doesn't exist anymore. The sound of a language nobody else speaks. He was quiet for a moment. It's sad, but it's not lonely anymore. Nora looked at him. He was different in small, permanent ways. His eyes caught the light differently than they used to, shifting slightly in low darkness. He sometimes knew things a moment before they happened. He would never be entirely ordinary again, but he was completely and stubbornly. I still Cole The man who had walked up to her door at 3:00 in the morning with his hands in his pockets and nothing to offer except a decision. Bray found them both later, and mentioned with the dry tone of a man who had earned the right to it that the bonded claim was now registered permanently in the KTH legal archive and could not be challenged, and that the legal fees alone had exceeded the annual budget of 2 colonies. Worth it, Nora said. Bray looked at Cole. Hey, how are you holding up? Cole considered it. I've got a 4,000-year-old alien weapon living in my head and a legal marriage on the books of an alien empire, he said, but I know where I am. For the first time in 7 years, he looked at Nora. So I'd say I'm doing all right. Bray nodded and walked away and pretended not to notice when Nora reached over and took Cole's hand at the viewport. And somewhere in the galactic record, updated quietly by a dozen alien civilizations that had monitored the standoff from a careful distance, humanity's entry was amended. An unknown archivist believed to be Kareth changed a single field under threat classification where it had previously read developing negligible. There was now one word. It had no direct human translation. The closest meaning anyone could find was something between dangerous and worthy of memory. The humans, and if they had known, would probably have taken both. The stars outside the viewport burned on, cold and ancient and indifferent. The same stars they had always been, but the people standing under them were not the same. They had been tested in the specific way that only impossible things can test you, and they had come through it not by being stronger or smarter or better armed, but by being stubbornly, completely, impossibly of themselves. That in the end yet was the only weapon that had ever really mattered.